Hi, and welcome to the Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 137. What can flight simulators teach us about networking? So, heavier than air flight is a complicated process. Through the thousands of years of human history, we've had tales of, people making wings out of wax, falling out of buildings, trying to fly, and man, it got really complicated and deadly and humorous in some cases. But for the vast majority of human history, flight was a fancy. It was something that really couldn't have been achieved. And then in the early 20th century, the Wright brothers, according to American history, were the first to achieve heavier than air flight. They did this by basically strapping a a motorcycle engine to paper and wood and called it a plane. Anyway, fast forward to today, modern times, and we are or have been obsessed with flight, from movies like Top Gun to video games like Red Baron. We've had a lot of different, flight associated shows and movies. For All Mankind is another one. These are all different kinds of shows that are obsessed with flying and flight, and the pilots that fly their aircraft or spacecraft or whatever. And to be fair, it's kind of cool. And one of the things, growing up and being a child obsessed with video games, one of the things that I used to play a lot of were flight simulators. And flight simulators, if you don't know, are video games that are generated to simulate the experience of flying. Now, the vast majority of them are basically just joystick controlled games. They don't really have a physics engine attached. They're really just basic 3D first-person emulation. There's not really a true physics engine there. It's not establishing gravity or any sort of limitation on the pilot. So, doing what would be considered a, 20G move in a video game doesn't actually exist. That doesn't have any impact on the body of the pilot. The plane is effectively indestructible when it comes to torque and maneuverability in the air. And yeah, it makes flight really seem deceptively easy because there's no real impact on the plane. Now, modern flight simulators such as Microsoft Flight Simulator X or whatever, X-Plane is another one. These do attempt to provide a physics engine to the system so that flying feels more real than it otherwise would in a flight simulator. But still, these games do a weird thing in that they make flying deceptively easy. They make the act of flying an airplane or a jet or whatever seem easy. And that's, growing up as a kid, I was like, oh man, flying a plane would be super easy. All you gotta do is just, pull up on the stick, plane goes up, push forward on the stick, plane goes down, turn left, plane goes left, turn right, plane goes right. It makes sense, right? But these are deceptions in how easy it is to control a plane. Because kind of as I mentioned before, there are a lot of different factors: wind speed, weather, air pressure. There's things like air pockets, turbulence. You've got different kinds of obstacles and objects and challenges in the air that make it difficult to fly. On top of that, how the maneuvering of the plane and your plane's maneuvering in the air and in space causes different effects on your own body. So, if you're pulling up and you're flying straight up in the air, you're now flying straight up. Gravity is pulling you down, straight back down through the chair of the plane. In a flight simulator, you don't get that same feel. You don't get that challenge. What that's going to do to your body and your ability to respond to the plane. Also, if you do too fast of a maneuver, you might cause the blood to rush out of your head or rush into your head and cause a blackout or a redout, where you lose the ability to focus, or you lose the ability to even be awake, which causes issues with your ability to fly. And so these things are all different considerations that if you didn't know better on a flight simulator, it can really make it seem easy instead of really a true representation of how difficult it actually is. So networking can be the same way, in that, for a lot of people, for users, networking can seem easy because, I plug the network cable into my router. I plug the network cable into my computer. I get internet. Network easy. This is simple, right? I connect to the Wi-Fi. I get internet. Easy. This is easy. And there aren't really a lot of considerations as to, some of the more difficult aspects of networking and how those can impact a user. For instance, one of the things that we see a lot in just general IT is we see people wanting to bring in their own equipment, and with no consideration to how that might affect the overall network in an environment. So, for instance, you have a doctor who decides that, they have their own office, or maybe not even a doctor. You can have it as, I've seen it at checkout counters at a retailer, where whoever is working on that system is like, I don't really want to bother my IT guy with this, but I need to have more devices connected to the network. So I'm going to go buy my own switch and I'll just connect it underneath my desk. And they don't really have any considerations to what that means, how that's going to affect things on the network. And by doing that, one of the things that they might do is that they could be affecting extremely negatively their own connection to the network, because in a situation like that, really, there is a limitation as to how many network switches you should have daisy chained on a network. Daisy chaining is a concept, or it's a term, basically where you are connecting one device through another device through a straight connection. So if you have 4 or 5 or 6 switches daisy chained along a chain, and you have your devices connected to that 6th switch in that line, what's going to happen is there's going to be a significant increase in latency on that network connection, which could cause issues with packets being dropped, because now the timing between the network send and receive could be breaking because you've now introduced a new device into the network. And a normal user may not have those considerations, because again, they're just like, I connect cable to my computer, I get internet, network easy, right? So that's just one of the peculiarities for networking that come across with simple changes that could have some significant impacts. Another one is for your home network. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the number of networks that you're broadcasting out of your access point or your home router or whatever, that can affect your connectivity and your ability to properly connect to your network. So every SSID or Wi-Fi that you broadcast out of your access point decreases the amount of traffic that you can tunnel through that access point. It is suggested that you should have no more than 3 or 4 different SSIDs or Wi-Fis being broadcast from your AP. And the reason why I'm saying SSIDs or Wi-Fis is because, for whatever reason, people have conflated both of them and they think they are the same thing. They are not. But for the simplicity of this and not to get too bogged down in the minutia, SSD equals Wi-Fi at this point. But if you're broadcasting several SSIDs, you're basically causing your access point to spend all of its cycles on making sure that everybody knows that those SSDs are available to connect to. And even if you aren't broadcasting them, the fact that you're having them available on that access point causes that same activity, or can cause that same activity, and therefore degrade your network performance or your ability to connect at all. So, if you have like 15 different access points, which I've seen at certain organizations and in buildings, specifically in like shared office spaces, that can really degrade your ability to connect or have a trustworthy or constant network connection. Now, beyond that, these issues can actually make your network connection really seem kind of spooky. I mean, like, I don't mean that like ghosts and whatnot. What I mean is like, it can allow you to connect sometimes, but not connect other times. And it can really seem like you're actually under attack because various times you're able to connect and not. For instance, I had a customer who had an office building. It was a shared office space. And right about 9 a.m., they would just lose connectivity to all of their networks. Like every device that they had would just drop connection. And they were pissed because it was like, well, I'm paying you guys thousands of dollars to allow me to connect to my devices. I've paid thousands of dollars in equipment fees. Why is this happening? And the problem is that every day at 9 a.m., that's when one of the other companies in their building would actually start doing business. And by virtue of doing this, they would actually turn on additional equipment in their office, which caused a loop on the network switch. Because it's a shared office space, there was no dedicated network to each individual office. So they all shared this one network. And because this one company had this network loop, it brought everything down. And to describe to, everybody, to those who might not know, a network loop is basically where you've connected one cable in to one port on a switch, and then you connect it to another port on the same switch. Now, there are ways to do this across multiple switches or multiple devices where you've basically connected the network to itself, and that can cause an issue. That can cause significant issues, especially if you don't have the proper protocols turned on your networking equipment to prevent that. So these are considerations. Again, it's not as simple as I connect cable into computer to get internet. It's more complicated than that. Just like flying is more complicated than push throttle up, pull stick back, I go up. This is more. It's very much more complicated than that. So some more things that might happen that you've got that cause issues are things like IP address exhaustion. If you have so many devices connected to your network, you can have what is called IP address exhaustion, where you have a limited number of IP addresses. And by default, your IP address range is 254 addresses long. So if you have 254 devices connecting to your network, you've now exhausted your pool of addresses, and you have to either expand that network segment, or you have to create a new one. And this is a consideration that a lot of people don't have. And it's not necessarily even that you have 254 devices connected to your network right now. It's that you've had 254 devices connected at all, because lease information on networking. And I guess I'm going to have to do a whole episode about DHCP, which fuck that. Jeez. Anyway, if you have too many devices that have ever connected to your network within a certain amount of time, you can exhaust the amount of IP addresses you've had, and therefore that can limit your ability to have other devices connect to your network, which means it's more complicated. It just becomes more and more complicated as you get into these things. There are a lot of ways around that. But again, if you don't know necessarily what you're doing, you could be doing it the wrong way, such as, if you caught what I said earlier, you could expand your network pool. You could expand your network segment to include more addresses. So if you went from a /24 to a /23, so now you have 511 addresses assignable to your network. That's one way to do it, but that also increases latency on the network and can have other considerations. So again, more complicated than just plug cable into computer. Beyond that, there are also considerations that you have to have with things like cable length. Right now, the maximum cable length that you should have on a network cable is 300 feet, give or take. That's not in all circumstances, not in all situations. There are ways to have a longer cable. Yes, if you're a pedantic motherfucker like all of us IT guys are, there are circumstances where having a longer cable is possible. However, generally, average suggested network length maximum is 300 feet. The shorter you get, the better it is. The reason this is because the longer a cable is, the more resistance there is on that cable, the less likely the signal is to successfully connect to or establish a connection across the network. So 300 feet is the maximum length for a consistent and constant connection. Now, what does this mean for you as a user, or for the person who doesn't necessarily know a whole lot? That means if you have a connection that's longer than 300 feet, you can run into specific issues. I had another client who they were a used car sales, and they had a garage which was about 500 feet across the parking lot, and they wanted to connect the garage to the main building. And so they hired some guy to basically trench a line across the parking lot so that they could be connected. And they didn't understand why they kept dropping connection. And this is why. If you want a connection longer than 300 feet, you should probably be using a different connection medium, such as fiber or coax. Those are both possibilities. There are a lot of other different possibilities out there as well. But a single Ethernet line, Cat5, Cat6, Cat7, ABCDE, any of those should be maxed out right around 300 feet to ensure connectivity, proper connectivity across that line. Now, again, like I said, there are circumstances where those change, and be aware of that. And it's more complicated than I'm just going to run a line from point A to point B. It's very much more complicated than that. Another thing that you have to consider when connecting network, another thing that makes it complicated, is things like, latency and bandwidth and overall traffic consumption. These are all considerations when evaluating your network connection, and specifically to the internet. And this is what a lot of people don't necessarily understand about the numbers that their internet service providers give them. So they think, I have broadband internet, which, by the way, is considered anything above 300 kilobits per second. So broadband is not necessarily a term you want to be able to use right now. They've argued about changing the definition of broadband to a higher ratio. But right now, anyway, the whole point being is that the broadband traffic isn't necessarily an evaluation of speed as much as it's just getting over a specific line. But if you have an internet service provider that is providing you with a internet line that is 300 megabits per second or 1 gig per second, you need to ask what that means specifically. Is that 1 gigabit down? Is that 1 gigabit up? Is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? All these considerations come into play, because you can have as much bandwidth available to you coming down, but if you don't have any upload associated with that, it's going to affect your ability to do things. So situations where, and this is where Comcast becomes an issue, because they advertise their shit as being, we've now got 2.5 gig lines. We can do a 2.5 gigabit per second connection to your house, well, that's all and good, but that's just straight down. It's like 2.5 gigabyte down and 60 meg up, which if you're doing any sort of high density video download, there's some upward traffic that you need to send back that could be limited by the fact that you're only able to send 60 meg back up that line. So that is a consideration that you have to have. And on top of that, that 2.5 gigabit per second line that you're paying for may not be able to be used by your internet connection. Now, Comcast might give you a fancy router that they now control all your internet traffic through. But with that router, it has to be rated to receive 2.5 gigs down. And on top of that, your device has to be rated to be able to send and receive 2.5 gigs down. So the Ethernet port, if it's not configured for 2.5 gigs, isn't going to use 2.5 gigs. It can only probably use 1 gig max. And so again, these are all considerations that you have to have for network. Now, a lot of this stuff, if you've been an IT guy for a while, you've been in the game for a bit, or you've passed your A+ certifications and whatnot. If you've had all of that in place, you're probably like, yeah, this is all very basic. But these are considerations that normal people probably don't have when they're establishing their knowledge and concept of networking. Because again, I plug the cable into my router, I plug it into my computer, and I get internet. That's how simple it is. That's how simple it seems. Just like when I fly my fucking plane into a wall and I restart, it's like, oh, well, I just need to turn my joystick left so I can avoid that, instead of considering how many G's I'm pulling by flying at Mach 1 and doing a 90-degree turn and not passing out because my plane's invulnerable. Yeah, that makes sense. That's all I got time for today, guys. I hope you all have a great day.